So I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and it's really a pleasure to meet all of you. I hope I get a chance to talk to many of you individually. And I was thinking, since we have a pitch this afternoon, I'm going to keep this very informal, but I will be giving a couple of examples of some companies here that I think are very interesting. I wish we had the pitch beforehand, because I could probably work some of those into my conversation, because I'm sure there are some terrific companies this afternoon. So if we do another conversation around that, maybe you'll find yourselves in my talk and in my conversation in the future. Before I get started, I was asked to talk a little bit and motivate some of the people here, since there's so much focus on ICT, which is great. I was also asked to motivate a little bit of thinking directions for startups other than ICT. So before I get started, I wanted to ask who in the audience here, whose background is in fact ICT? Okay, the rest of you are either very shy or, wow, you've already done my job. So which is it? Just to demonstrate the shy point or not? Whose background here is not in ICT and you don't know anything about ICT, or your background is really not? So great, quite a few, and then there's a number of you that have not responded either way, which is perfectly fine. But it's great that there's a mixture here, and then feel free to speak up as we address some of the areas where they might speak to your specific background. So again, I'm going to keep this fairly informal, and I'll talk about several specific companies and talk about why I like them and what are some of the things about them that I think are key points for bigger trends and things that you might be interested in exploring for yourselves. So the talk that I'm giving here is about alternative paths. And before I talk about the alternative paths, again, what's kind of the expected path? Well, I just kind of gave you the answer in terms of ICT, but the expected path, I'm guessing in this area, I really don't need to explain this symbol to anyone. Is there anyone here who does not know who this company represents? It's a fantastic company as far as I'm concerned. I've been using Skype products for quite a long time. But certainly what we want to talk about is what are some paths, what are some opportunities to achieve great success on a business scale, but also to make a difference in the world, that maybe take a different look, a different view of the world from Skype. So, are there really other paths? Here I'm quoting poetry at you at this point, so maybe some of you are familiar with this poem, maybe some of them are not. The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost, I just want to remind all of you, you might be familiar with the poem. I want to remind all of you, there are paths other than the main path, the path that everyone else around you seems to be taking. And it is generally well worthwhile to explore those paths. So let's take a look at some of them. Before I talk about what some of those paths are and give you some examples, I want to just briefly talk about my own background. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on it, but I want to give you a little bit of perspective on how I think about it and why I think about looking at alternate paths to just ICT. My own educational background certainly includes ICT, but it also includes other technology areas. So I did my undergraduate work in the US at MIT. I have two bachelor's degrees. One is in electrical engineering, computer science. So I like to think I have some insight into ICT as well, but also then in molecular biology, and then my PhD is from Berkeley and San Francisco, actually in biomedical engineering. So even in my education, very interdisciplinary, very coordinated among different technology and non-technology areas. And then I've worked in a number of research laboratories as well as startup companies as well as corporations. And for the last, 12, 14 years or so, I have been heading up Taku Group, which is a consulting company which helps technology-based companies expand into new markets. So we think all about getting into new markets, expanding globally, and where are the convergence of technologies and business. So this kind of mixed background is what motivates me to think not just in terms of the ICT or any one single path, but really what motivates me to think in terms of how do you think about the bigger picture. So enough about me. Back to more interesting things. One of the things I found actually attributed to the Estonian VC Association. I'm not sure, I haven't seen a publication with them saying these exact words, but I think this is attributed to them. So I want to just give a couple of thoughts in terms of how people, at least, because I think this resonates with how a lot of people think in terms of what's happening in the VC scene, what's happening in the startup scene, what's happening in technology in Estonia at this time. Certainly the VC culture is still expanding and developing. Near and dear to my own heart is that there are, at least as of 2 years ago, there were no women VCs. I won't get derailed on that subject, but if you know of any exceptions to that rule, I'd love to hear about them. But really the more important point that I wanted to make here that came out of this, which is still somewhat of a perception, is that money is really not a problem in Estonia, but that there's a lack of ideas and projects. You may or may not agree with that statement. I'm not saying I agree with that statement. This is a statement that is, again, attributed to someone else, and in particular an association that thinks a lot about this. So this may or may not also apply to some of the surrounding regions. So I want you to kind of think about how you feel about that statement, being from Estonia or being from Finland or some of the other countries in this region. For me personally, oops, let me point this in the right direction. So much for my technology skills. Click. Yes? Maybe? We'll find out. Maybe I'll do it manually from here. Is that an option? Trying to move the slide forward is really what I'm trying to do at the moment.
Help is on the way.
Help is on the way. Fantastic. We'll find out if we can always go down manually. In any event, well, that's not it. But the point that I really want to dwell on is this idea of lack of project and ideas. If I were you, I would be somewhat personally offended by that. I don't actually think that that's really a problem. I think there's a huge amount of highly intelligent, highly educated, highly creative people in this region, just as there really are anyplace else. So lack of ideas and projects, not in my opinion, not in my book. But what are you actually going to do about that? So I think this perception can come from a variety of areas, and the perception also can tie into, do you really have ideas? Remember, this comes from the VC Association. So this comes from the perspective of what kinds of things do we want to fund as VCs, and how big, thinking as VCs, how big are these kinds of ideas? So there's, in my opinion, no lack of ideas and creativity, but there may be a lack of connecting ideas in sufficiently new and sufficiently large areas that have reasonable business models with, since we're talking about technology here, with defensible technologies around them. So I suspect that that's where some of this thinking comes from. But again, I'd rather have you take it as a personal challenge to prove this particular statement wrong. So, yes, what am I doing wrong? It worked earlier. I think help may not only need to be on the way, but help may need to just simply be here. So I want to talk about, I'll let you deal with that part. How's that? or give me the magic button to push that's other than the forward button on my equipment here. I want to talk about several companies and give you not detailed technology explanations or business model explanations about each of them, but I just want to use them as some informal examples of why these companies jump out at me. Several of them you'll undoubtedly have heard of. No, they're not as big as Skype, but several of them are local and several of them are hot and in the news these days. So does anyone happen to be here from Fitz? Perfect, love it. So I know I did not get paid to put an advertisement in here for these guys, but I actually really love what you're doing. So I think this is great, and by all means speak up, because you of course know much more about the company and the internal workings than I do. But what I really love about this company, besides the fact that it's not purely an ICT company, is several things. So first of all, what do they do for those of you who don't yet, or who are not yet familiar with the company? To me, it's a fabulous combination of taking, yes, an internet problem. I'm sure all of you have ordered things on the internet before. Some of you may have purchased apparel on the internet before. I know I have. And there's always a huge problem with fit. So the company really has taken a substantial commercial problem, which is in the e-commerce internet world, and has done something about it, but not approaching it purely from an ICT perspective. So there is actually a real significant business problem here, because fit is something that's incredibly difficult to determine when you're attempting to purchase clothing online. So if you've done that, you're probably familiar with there's a high return rate and a high generally dissatisfaction rate. So again, what I love about this company is that it really, aside from just taking a serious business problem and solving it, is that it brings together not just software expertise, but it actually brings together understanding of human data, anthropometric data, robotics, and probably even some understanding of materials, because it's not just, the fit of a certain piece of clothing is going to be different, not just based on your size relative to the clothing size, but also relative to, are we talking about cotton, silk, wool, rayon, polyester? What kind of a piece of clothing are we talking about? What kind of material are we talking about? So this actually seems at some level like a fairly straightforward business problem. But the interesting things and the reason why this hasn't been solved in many years is that it actually, the solution to it requires bringing together a number of different disciplines. Actually, I would say a good 10 years ago, I worked with a startup company in e-commerce in apparel. And guess what? This would have been phenomenal to have way back then, because this was a company that worked and had worked with quite a few different designers that, again, was some enabling technology and truly was just an ICT company. But this was one of the most vexing problems that really limited the usefulness ultimately of it. So again, it's the combination of many different disciplines that makes this a truly interesting company as they apply their know-how to solving a problem. One of the things that is still there, I talked a little bit about different materials, different fabrics and everything. One of the things that I see partially is being addressed by this company is how does that affect my decision in terms of fitting, but it still doesn't yet solve one of the substantial problems of, am I actually going to like the fabric? How does it actually feel to me, right? There's no way that you can really do that. I might see how it drapes, but I don't know actually what it feels like. Am I going to like what I feel when I actually get it in the mail? So here's another company whose technology I think is in the wow category. So this one happens to be a Finnish company, I believe. And this is a company that addresses that question of feel, not for the apparel market, but actually much, much broader than that. So if you can just go through a couple of the clicks here. So in this company, we are talking, again, about a combination of disciplines and a combination of technologies where you can actually feel, as you're interacting, for example, with your tablet on the screen with your finger, you can actually feel different textures on that. That would be really cool. That would actually be really cool from an apparel point of view. So if the Fits.me people want to integrate that, even better. But this goes much, much, much beyond this, right? So this is an example of, this is an enabling technology that spans so many different applications, it's not even funny. So where do you even begin with something like this? So this company, again, a hot company, getting lots of good press, even getting lots of good press in the United States, which I love. And this is something that you should really take as an example of how do you take multiple disciplines, how do you take something and solve one of the more fundamental underlying business problems? Can we have another? So in this case, without going into the technology details, that's kind of cool. I mean, if the pictures that I just showed you, they had a topographical map. You can feel the really rough texture. They had an example of smooth, silky feeling. How do you get all of that just by moving your finger around on a screen somewhere? So really by altering and modulating the electrical signals and interaction of your finger with the screen, you can get an amazing amount of different sensations as if you were feeling things that really aren't actually physically there. Very cool. I mean, to me, just from a scientist's point of view, this is a very cool thing. But from a business applications point of view, Think about all the things that had to come together in order to make that happen. Think about all the things that had to come together in order for someone to even consider that this might be a useful business application. So what I really like, again, about this company is that someone had to come and bring medical people together to understand how does the physiology work? What needs to actually be applied to my fingertip for me to think I'm touching a piece of silk when I'm not really? What actually has to happen physiologically in order for me to be fooled, truly fooled? Gee, I'm touching a rough topographical map, to use that other example, or whatever else it is. Acoustics, psychology, engineering, and yes, computer science, ICT. So think of the very cool combinations that come together, and think of how many different ways in which you can do that. I sort of introduced this with the problem of purchasing apparel, but think of both the research applications as well as any computer interface that we're talking about. Think of all the things that you can, all the directions that you can go in with this. So this is another example of very cool technology that can really change how we actually interact with computers and how we actually interact with anything automated in our lives, which is pretty much everywhere. So this is a slide with very little content, with reason. I'm actually really excited. This is a specific company also, but it's one that I can't really talk about that much yet in terms of identifying details, but I'm really, really excited about it, and it's in a completely new area as well. So this is, there are actually two companies coming together here. And again, one thing I like about it is that it is one of those fundamentally shifting how you think about basic technologies and how do you think about solving the usual problems in these applications areas. And this is what I want you to do, in really thinking of, okay, everyone's looking at it this way, this is the normal path. How do we step outside and really think about a problem from a completely different angle? This is what's going on here. So the reason I can't put details on this one yet is because we're actually just putting together a deal here, and the information is still confidential. So I can't tell you who the company is, but I can just tell you a little bit of background, because there are some highlighting points that I want to make to give you some things to think about, and also some not cautions, but some things to be aware of as you are thinking about alternative paths. One of them is that well, first of all, what is this? So this company, this joint venture coming together of several entities, this is a company now that takes the basic problem of energy generation, which we are grappling with. Clean technologies and alternative energies are a huge topic these days, which we'll talk about more later on today as well as one of the alternatives. But there are many possible ways to do that. What's interesting to me, or one of the interesting things to me about this company, is that we're not just finding alternative ways to generate energy, and in fact doing that in a distributed generation manner, which already makes it more interesting, I think, from the perspective of what does the world really need and what business problems are we solving. But we're simultaneously dealing with a problem of how do we deal with garbage that we all produce. Again, there are ways of doing that as well. We have ways of handling garbage that go beyond throwing it into a landfill. Certainly throughout Europe, incineration is used as one means of dealing with the garbage problem. But there are other ways in which garbage can be dealt with more effectively, and garbage can be mined as a valuable resource in its own right that go well beyond what can be done with incineration. So I think that's pretty cool. And by the way, I never used to think that I would be in the business of dealing with garbage. That's not really what I got my PhD for, and it's not really what I was studying for in the path I was going down. But here's a possibility of taking some technologies and applying them to a totally new area and coming up with something which is not only really cool from a technical point of view, but which is solving substantial business problems. And oh, by the way, one of the players in this, their roots are, they're an IT company. So in the energy generation space, we're also dealing with how do we, especially when we're talking about distributed generation, how do we put all that energy into the grid, and what do we do with it, and how do we effectively control it, right? I mean, you've all thought or experienced or at some level dealt with smart grid and changes in our power systems. But IT is playing a huge role in that as well. And so what's interesting about this company is really putting together all of these things in a completely, I would say every single one of the people in these companies, they never would have guessed that they would end up in these application sectors. And so that's what I think that's the really important part here, is thinking of what you know and what your educational background is and where your expertise lies, and being open to finding things that are completely alternative to what you're already doing or what you're familiar with doing. So again, going beyond, gee, I'm going down this path, and I'm going to keep going down the same path. And really being able to open your minds to, well, this is what I know. Wow, there could be an application way over here somewhere. That's what I want you to think in terms of, not just everyone's going down this path and I want to go follow it. So soon I'll be able to tell you much more details about this one. There's one other company that I want to talk about a little bit. This one's not a huge company, but it's a company that has some qualities about it that I actually really, really like. It's been around for, I don't know, some years. It is an Estonian company originally. And this is a company which, again, exemplifies some qualities that I think are tremendous strengths for it, and are things that I think are worthwhile picking up on and worthwhile learning about and incorporating into your activities, and particularly your own startup activities. Originally, this is a company that I think was much more, so now we're talking biotechnology, right? So originally, this is a company that was much more interested in having a platform and being involved in much more directly in the drug development work, which is for those of you who are not in that sector, it is a long and arduous and expensive path. So somewhere along the line, I think this company made a shift in strategy, and now the company is really more operating as a clinical research organization. So if I'm a drug development company and I need to have a clinical trial developed somewhere, which I do in order to get my drugs developed into market, I'll need to go through hundreds of millions of dollars to get my drugs there by doing clinical trials. This is one of the companies that can help me do that. So I don't know if you're familiar with this one or not. But again, it's based here. They also have an office. I actually know the person who's in Silicon Valley. And so they have a really nice bridge already between the two cultures. So why this company? Why is this a useful example to talk about when we're talking about alternative paths here, besides the fact that they're in the biotech sector as opposed to the ICT sector? This is a company that, you heard about agility earlier, has been quite successful. Again, they're not a huge company. They're not going to become, I don't think, one of the big gorillas, the multinational, really truly global CROs in the sector. But this is a company that has amply demonstrated we're going down this path, and for whatever reason, that's not taking us exactly where we want to go. And we've really done a dramatic shift in business model. And now they're in the business of providing a service to the global biotechnology company. That's actually really, really difficult shift. And again, it's an example of taking a completely alternative path and making it work very well for themselves. So that's something that's hugely in their favor. And I don't care which company you're in, or I don't care which path you're going down, you really need to always stay open to that. Another thing I like about this company, I've actually known them for some years. Known them and known of them in some years, because our company does a lot of work in the biotechnology sector as well. I actually didn't realize that they were from Estonia. Those of you who are from here locally, you might find that offensive, but don't, please don't. This is a good thing. Why? Because the company has done a really successful job of promoting the quality of the services that they provide. In the biotechnology industry, when someone is looking for a partner with whom to do clinical trials, no one cares which country you're from. And particularly, many people in the US probably don't know how to find Estonia on a map. Again, don't be offended. I'm just giving you the reality of those of us with big national egos in the US, which is still too many. And what people want to know is, can you provide me the quality? The quality of service that I need, because you are now handling my drug, which is going to cost me about $1 billion to get to market. I need to know quality is there. So the fact that it's from Estonia is not only not secondary, but it's way down the line. So the thinking of this company in presenting itself as a fabulous quality service provider is phenomenal. So what you see on this slide, I actually just copied straight from the website. And the reason I did it was because it's such a good example of, a lot of times when I work with companies, and if they are service providers, a lot of times I think, oh no, especially if it's a sector where the competition is really high in the US, like it is, there are many companies competing with these guys. And I think, oh, here we go. What am I going to do with a company that wants to expand into the US market? Quality, 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 quality. And look, they've really done an excellent job of putting that first. Speed and cost is really the third point for them. So again, a company that has been tremendously successful in terms of their repositioning and in terms of how do they understand the market they're in, which was not their original home market. So think in terms of what matters there and have the ability and the agility and the flexibility to do that. So again, relatively small company, but hugely successful in terms of the qualities that they bring. So what is the common thread in some of these? I picked several examples of companies that are really extremely disparate. What's the common thread on all of these? Well, first of all, they're doing well at different degrees of stages of development, different degrees of what does doing well mean for each of them. But they're doing well, and they've done some things really successfully. So one of the common threads is I've given you some clean tech examples, I've given you a biotech example, I've given you, yes, an e-commerce example, but in the apparel industry, which is very much a non-tech, really low-tech kind of an industry, there really truly is life outside of mobile applications, outside of gaming, even outside of IT. So think much, much more broadly in terms of the possible sectors and in terms of the core competencies that you think you can locally develop here in this region. There truly is life outside of that. Despite what I just said, there actually really isn't life outside of that. So I take back what I just said. Everything really is IT. So how can both of those be true? How can I stand up here with a straight face and say both of those things? I think in all of the examples that I gave you, IT was a component, right? So pretty much in all of but not in everything, but in technology-based business applications, one way or the other, computing is going to enter into it, because that's where some of the most, we're all dealing with tons of data, and that's where some of the most exciting applications come from. So if you are in ICT, then I'm not here to tell you move out of that area. I am here to tell you that your skills and your expertise will also be applicable in a variety of other areas. And if you're not in that area, get familiar with it, because it's going to become part of your life no matter what you do. So I think both of these statements really, even though they're directly contradictory, I think both of these statements really are true at the same time. And they have to be. So why is this? Because of the multidisciplinary piece, right? I think the most exciting company opportunities and the most exciting projects and the most exciting technologies, regardless, are those that are multidisciplinary. When I was in an undergraduate, I told you earlier, I have an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, computer science, and one in molecular biology. It wasn't that long ago. It's been a few years, but it wasn't that long ago. At that point, people were still saying, why in the world are you studying these two different areas? Are you just collecting degrees or something? I said, well, no, this isn't. First of all, they're interesting. I think anything technical is interesting. But secondly, don't you think there will come a day when these two things start converging? Well, this day has been here, right? It is here now, and we continue to live it even more. I don't care if you're an academic researcher or I don't care if you're in business. The most exciting things these days are no longer in the siloed individual sectors. And even earlier this morning, we heard about collaboration, even within a university, but especially in the business applications. The most exciting applications and the most exciting business models also are those that draw on a variety of disciplines. So not just a variety of technology disciplines, but definitely including a variety of technology disciplines and other non-technical disciplines as well. So that's really where the most promising opportunities are, and that's really where the convergence of multiple trends creates, yes, some amount of chaos, And no, not everyone playing in those fields and those intersections will be successful, but that's where I believe where most of the really exciting business growth will come from. So startups really are making a difference, and they are making a difference in a lot of different fields. And I want to talk a little bit about where I see some of the more specific, the more exciting paths. The range of different disciplines that you see here are some of the ones where I think the most exciting developments in and of themselves from a technology area come from. So certainly IT or ICT is on that list, absolutely, without a doubt. But I also see it in materials. I mean, certainly nanomaterials is one of those great examples that really just cuts across all disciplines. And if someone asks me, gee, do you think there's good business opportunities in nanomaterials? Yes, but I think that's just a fundamental question. It's really, what do you do with that? Because it's one of those enabling technologies that cuts across everything. And biomaterials as well as genetic engineering in and of itself. So I'm taking the idea of materials to be extremely broad. And any of you that are in any of those fields related to materials, I would encourage you to really think in terms of how is it that those interface with the other disciplines and solve the fundamental problems. COM is short for communications there. And the basic science piece I put in there because, again, let's not kid ourselves that computer science and ICT it's not the same as the other sciences in that sense. So make sure that you're really including in your thinking, whether it's materials, whether it's basic physics, whether it's chemistry, basic biology, make sure you're including in your thinking opportunities for that. We have the next. So it's really the intersection of those where I see, not in any one. I'm not going to sit here and try to be the prognosticator for the next hot thing is going to be this slice in genetic engineering. No, it's not about that. It's really about how do you take these and interface. The more of these interfacing arrows up here that you can create, well, if you get too carried away with it, you'll probably just have a confusing mess. But the more of those you can create, the more interfaces you can create in the work that you do, the higher the chances, in my opinion, of something really exciting popping out of it. So what do you do with those? In terms of the application areas, again, in my opinion, the most exciting paths for companies are likely to be either where, not either or, but are likely to be in one or more of these three general, very broad-based application areas: health, environment, and social shifts. I'll tell you what I mean by those. So health, anything biotech, medical related, anything in terms of prevention. There are just huge shifts in the medical arena, moving from simply treating individual disease states to prevention and treating the entire, not treating medically, but thinking in terms of the entire notion of wellness as an integrated being. So taking everything from that inner circle and bringing it to bear on questions of health is one of the most fundamentally useful things that you can do in business applications. Same thing from an environmental point of view. So environment is a hugely broad topic, and in of itself, it too interfaces with health, of course, right? I mean, my own personal health depends on the wellness of my environment. So, for example, I'm leaving out here quite deliberately huge business sectors like, I didn't mention here energy, even though a lot of our work is in the energy field. But from the point of view of thinking about alternative paths and thinking about where can you find interesting business opportunities, I actually don't think in terms of, gee, it's in the energy sector, or gee, it's in some other sector. I think in terms of, if we think globally today, what are the shifts that are happening? And where are the opportunities created by those shifts, right? Anytime there's shift, there's change, that means new opportunity. I think much more in terms of environmental. So it's not the fact that, gee, yes, of course I can still make lots of money in just producing, going into the oil business or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of money to be made in some of those areas. But if you're looking not just to make money, but if you're looking to create a very financially successful business and solving some global problems, then I would encourage you to think instead in terms of these kinds of environmental issues or health issues and reframe the original business problems and not think of it just in terms of, in my example, just to follow on with that one, the energy sector or some other sector, but reframe your thinking in terms of, with all the things that are happening in the world, with globalization continuing to expand, with populations continuing to expand, with climate changes continuing to occur, what are the environmental shifts that are happening? And as a result of both of those, what are the social shifts that are happening to us in general? So the categories I'm giving you here are deliberately broad, not to be vague, and therefore encompass everything and therefore not answer the question, but the categories here are deliberately broad to cause you to rethink how you approach the fundamental questions and to cause you to take away the usual kinds of, these are the world is carved up into these sectors, and to instead think in terms of what are the changes and where are the opportunities and how can I look at something which is normally viewed this way, how can I look at it this way? So social shifts can mean anything from environmental and health shifts to how do we change communication? How do we think in terms of education? How do we think in terms of entertainment? How do we think in terms of interacting with people on the other side of the globe? How do we think in terms of what it means to grow up and what expectations we have of life? All of these things are areas that are affecting each and every one of us, and that create business models and business opportunities. So, what's left in all of this for you guys as you think about your businesses? First of all, I want you to go out there and prove that one statement wrong. No lack of ideas here. Okay, I know that there's lots of ideas. Go out and apply them. It's just that when you are, if you find yourselves looking for financing, the lack is not in the creativity, it's not in the idea. The lack maybe, and it may have changed already, but the perceived lack at the time was, is there enough there to make fundable businesses? So here we are at a startup conference, so we clearly need to think in terms of viability of business model. So do yourselves a favor, not just for me, but do yourselves a favor and take that as a personal challenge to ensure that the rest of the world knows, yes, there's no lack of ideas here, and we have a fabulous creativity. More importantly even is talk to other people. So I've talked a lot this morning about interdisciplinary work and where the great opportunities are in business as well as science. So talk to other people who are not like yourselves. You have to do that. It's really, really easy. Even in Silicon Valley, we often see this. But one of the reasons why I think Silicon Valley, for example, is so successful is because you have an extremely large number of extremely bright people, yes, also with creative ideas, put together into a fairly small space, and it's very commonplace for everyone to talk to people with radically different backgrounds. But human nature also says we're really used to talking and we're really comfortable with talking with people who are a lot like us. Right? If you go to a party and you don't know a lot of people, but you know a few, you go to the people that you know and you sort of hang out with them and then they talk, right? This is what happens. And this is good. You get to say hi to your friends. But I want you to constantly challenge yourselves and talk to people who are really completely unlike yourselves, who come from completely different disciplines. That's where new business ideas happen. So this needs to really be a habit for you to constantly stretch yourselves. The interdisciplinary, aha, wow, we could do something, it's only going to come from those kinds of conversations. I also want you to be the right balance of patient and impatient. What do I mean by that? It's a little bit like saying there's life outside of IT, there's no life outside of IT. Well, impatient sense of urgency has to be there. I'm sure you already have it, otherwise you wouldn't be in the startup world. Keep it. It's a really good thing. Things have to happen. We have to keep going. Urgency has to be there. But also remember that, especially if you're taking alternative paths, patience has to be there as well. A lot of times in IT, things move fairly quickly. A lot of times in IT companies, you can get a business model that gets you profitable fairly quickly. If you start wandering down alternative paths, it could take many, many years. And I want you to be, if you're not already in those paths, I want you to be aware of that and have the timelines built into your expectations that that's okay with you. So I'll give you a couple of examples, and biotech is one notorious. If you really are developing new drugs, you're going to be at it for a really long time, and you're going to have a lot of candidates that don't go anywhere, drug candidates. But it also is true, for example, in clean technologies. The IT garbage energy company that I mentioned earlier, I actually started working with the California piece of that company and met them quite a few years ago. So they have had really cool technology, and technically it's always worked. But in terms of market economics, the time just wasn't right. It wasn't there. They sat on it, they sat on it, they sat on it. They did what they could. But if the market dynamics aren't there, they were simply ahead of their time. And they had to be patient. Fortunately, the people in that company knew that and they stuck with it. But it's not until this year that things are really exploding for them. So this is the reality of a lot of the paths that are not just in the IT path. So you have to build that kind of patience even with your urgency into it. And finally, the take time to think part is kind of the last point that I really want to leave you with. A lot of us in the startup world, and I see this in Silicon Valley and I see this in myself, are in the, Alfredo and I have talked about this before too. It's, you do things, you have about 3,700 different things to do in one day, right? And they all have to get done because we have that impatience and sense of urgency and we want to get everything done, and we're involved in lots of companies. For those of you who are really looking to change the world, doing is really important. Having time and energy to think creatively is even more so. Right? The work has to get done, no doubt about it. But this is a reminder to all of us who get involved in startup culture that the most creative thinking, as you're talking with people who are unlike yourselves, the most creative thinking has to occur when you're not running, doing. So just a little gentle reminder as well to make sure that in your crazy days of busyness and activity, you're also building in I don't care what it looks like for you as individuals. Maybe it's reflective time, maybe it's doing something active in a completely different area. But do make sure you do that as well. If you want brilliance and you want to change the world, stop doing. Reflect. So I'm happy to answer questions about any specific companies, and I'm also happy to hear from any of you as you may share a comment or a question around how are you thinking about radically different paths? Have you tried them? Have they worked for you? Have they not worked for you? What have you learned? So I'm going to be around today and all of tomorrow, and I'd love to hear from you as you share some of those experiences. Thank you very much. This didn't work.
Thank you, Karin. I really enjoyed being the human clicker for your slides.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have 2
minutes,
and we'll take one question from the audience. Just raise your hand and the mic will run to you. Is there any questions from the audience? One question. Otherwise, I will ask myself. Yeah, okay. There was a question. Please,
yes.
Microphone will come to you. I really enjoyed the fact that you pointed out that you should look at the intersection of different sciences. Even my grandfather told me that the most money is there. Look at the different fields where they intersect. But there is a question.
All I can say, his grandfather is wise and ahead of his time, because for so many decades, centuries, everything has been, I'm a physicist, I'm a biologist, I'm a chemist, I'm a whatever, but the intersection is really where it's at.
He was a lawyer, by the way.
And he was a lawyer. Fantastic, even better. So you come from good stock. Yes?
Yeah, I'm also a lawyer, by the way.
Aha, great.
Good for you.
The question is actually related to your last thought, that you have to have this reflective time. How come there isn't any technology or any kind of instant solution created that you can be creative in a second and you will have all these ideas how to click and how to have these interdisciplinary ideas?
How come there is not an instant solution to tap into that creativity?
Tap into your creative, this brainwave, like, and everything flies.
This is a woman who does not want reflective time. This is a woman who wants more doing and instant results. Are you sure you're not American? That's a very American theme as well. I think the short answer to that is there may very well be at some point in the future, but I think this process of creativity that has been studied a lot and is still poorly understood We know so little still. We're just at the very beginning of understanding neurology, neurobiology, and understanding brain function, right? I mean, just at a purely physiological level, speaking of an area that is hugely exciting and at a point where it is just booming when you're talking about functionally, not just at the individual neuron level, but functionally what's happening in the brain, it's just in its infancy. So why is there no instant solution where we can plug in some electrode in the right spot in your brain or feed you some pill with the right drug that stimulates the right thinking or something that gives you the instant, poof, I'm now creative? We wouldn't know where to apply it. We wouldn't know what to do. Because, so again, the short answer, we simply don't know enough about how the brain works yet in order to be able to turn that function on right away. Right now, we still have to, for better or for worse, we still have to accept that this is part of the subconscious processing, and that we have to accept that the brain has to be given the time and space to do its thing. But it sounds like a great research project, and I can promise you that if you solve that particular physiological problem, there's a huge business in there for you. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Karin, it was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank
Please take this little gift as a little token from our love to you.
Thank you.
And the audience, don't be Estonian today. Use the opportunity, go and talk to Karin because she will be here in the audience. Use that chance. Don't be Estonian and don't sit in your own corner. Talk to strange people, weird people, people you don't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And yes, by all means, I may be strange and I may be weird, but I'd be delighted to talk to any of you.